we are going to look at an absolute travesty, but then off the back of that, we're also going to look at a little indie gem that's just come out, and I'll also give you full review scores for those at the end. I think it's important to give the good the airtime, or certainly the developers that have actually put the effort in to create something that's enjoyable. And we're going to have that juxtaposed to some of the Eshop's very worst. So you can imagine my excitement when I saw Battlefront Trench Warriors Ops of Warfare had finally released onto the Eshop. With that in mind, I played the game. Oh boy, I played the game. What's it all about? Well, let's find out. Initial impressions are, as expected, you can choose from a number of different classes, including Assault Infantryman, Demolitionist, Infiltrator and Special Forces, not to mention Scout, and each of those has their own weapon type. I chose to go for the Infiltrator, the stealthy route. Also of note, from the main menu, you've got no options at all. You can just look at the controls, excited about what's going to take place, or stare at the slightly pixelated picture. Now the title doesn't have a story, but it does break up its gameplay into several different missions. You've got 8 per campaign or operation, and there are 3 different operations. You can gain a few different medals like Courage, completing it in under 60 seconds, or having good aim. Initial impressions are a mixed bag, and they range from bad to very bad. For starters, the camera looks like a fisheye lens. Now they may have just cranked the aspect ratio up on the Unity engine to try and give it some kind of cinematic flair, but it just looks a bit unusual. Now you can crouch with B, or you can lay down while pressing A, and you're instructed to do that right away. I'm guessing it's teaching me the controls. That is until I get blown up in the trench. I figure I must have stood up at the wrong time, so I reboot, and I staunchly follow their advice, creeping on my stomach, listening to the gunfire play around me, and then I die again. It also handily tells me my dead time, which I'm sure you can figure out. So I launch back in, not deterred by those 2 slightly unusual introductions, and this time decide to go full speed ahead. Unfortunately, I'm once again killed. My dead time shorter than it's ever been before, and I never actually see a bullet. Let's try again. This time things are going slightly better. That is until it tells me press the same button to get up. I stand up and I die. Just check out that dead time. Not to be fooled twice, when it tells me that I should get up, I decide not to, so as not to get shot in the head. Hurrah, happy days, we're through the first section, and it tells me to sprint, so I sprint. And see what happens next, more dead time. Rather than take you back to the start of the section, it will take you all the way back to the start. It's very kind of it. This time round, a grenade hits me in the trench randomly from nowhere and I die again. After a little back and forth like a headless chicken, it was around about this point where the sound cut out on the game and I was plunged into silence. When you finally get to grips with how janky it is, it's pretty janky. At the end of each stage, you have a mission complete, which will show you your accuracy, the amount of kills you got, and also the deaths. There are different challenges for the completion time, for finishing in under a minute, which has got to be nigh on impossible, and also your aim, which needs to be 100%. This one has to rank up with one of the most frustrating games I've ever played. Just the random nature of getting blown up without having any warning. Now, I know that obviously reflects the realities of certain combat and conflict scenarios, but it doesn't make for a very fun game. You can be crawling and suddenly die. You can be laying on your stomach in the mud. The ironies of the parallels to the current scenario I find myself in not lost on me, and then I die again. I can die running, die crouching. I can die even when I find myself going in the wrong direction, back to the start of the stage. Now performance begins to really suffer. As you move your way through these copy-paste stages, you'll notice some severe drops in frame rate, which only adds insult to injury, as you're struggling anyway to aim down the sights with not a whisper of gyroscopic control in sight. Yep, as I'm sure you can tell from the footage, this is one of the most infuriating games I think I've ever played. Yep, this one represents everything wrong with modern games, or at least modern smaller developers that are just focused on making money. It promises so much and it delivers almost nothing. The controls are rubbish, the gameplay loop is infuriating, the sound's terrible. The visuals, in fairness, are okay, but that's more a result of assets that actually look alright. But then performance is rubbish. Everything about it is slapdash. It's a mess. Avoid it like the plague. If you get the chance, kill it with fire. But let's have a look at a little indie game that's been in development for a while, and the guy sent me a code on Twitter, and I've been more than happy to play it as an antidote for the rubbish that we've just witnessed. Knights of the Rogue Dungeon is a very small little indie that looks lovely and harkens back to some of my favourite classics. The story goes that the knights travel from across the land, determined to cleanse the rogue dungeon of 3 evil demon knights that lurk within. Sometimes you really need to experience the music of a game to get the feeling that it gives the player. Take a listen to this. It's one of those soundtracks that is instantly captivating but also memorable. You can switch between a few different playable characters from the beginning. My personal favourite has to be Totes, possibly the greatest name ever. And there's an upgrade shop where you can spend your currency, that glorious gold that you'll gain from runs, and that's where the meta progression lies. Early on, one of the most important skills has to be the death tax, which reduces the price you'll pay for death. It's one of those where the goal seems so simple and yet familiar. Simply cleanse all of the dark tiles to make them light by stepping on them. Unfortunately, there are a few little critters moving around trying to stop you, and you're collecting gold coins as you go. It's one of those games that you look at and you think, well, that's easy, and then you play it and you're like, oh my goodness. It's like a real-time puzzle almost, as you're trying to anticipate where the enemies are going to move next, and if you're fast enough to be able to get into those hard-to-reach areas and out again before they make their move. Throw in the fact that each stage, the layout changes entirely and you have to kind of adapt. It's the highest compliment I can pay it to say it has that intangible quality that games like Pac-Man had in bucket loads. It's a combination of all of its aspects that lead it to feeling incredibly satisfying to play. But let's be honest, it's more than that. It's purely incredibly addictive. There are so many good addictive games, and this is falling well into that category. Now, progression does have certain checkpoints, so you don't always go all the way back to the start. Once you do reach the end of the level that you're currently on and worked your way through all its individual stages, you unlock the next stage. These are permanently unlocked, so you can go back. For example, the second is the graveyard area. And this introduces a few different enemies. Ones like the skull, which can jump twice the distance. They change the way you have to play quite drastically, obviously increasing the difficulty as well. While you can opt to go for joystick controls, this one really benefits from the D-pad, and there are some special moves you can unlock as well as an armor and an extra life to avoid a game over when you get hit. As far as criticisms around gameplay, it's generally pretty tight. It can be a little annoying when an enemy falls on your head right from the get-go, but one of the things you can upgrade is your luck. Plus, it doesn't break the cardinal rule. It is fair. There's a shadow, so you can see where they're going to drop. It's just whether or not your reactions are up to snuff. Now, I'm purposely not going to talk about the price of the first game we looked at because I really don't want any of you to go out and buy it. It's terrible. Knights of the Rogue Dungeon, though, is under £10, which is a bargain. Now, it's not perfect. On one hand, it's a little simplistic, potentially too simple for some, but for those who enjoy classic arcade games, you're going to love this, and it offers a decent challenge. Battlefront, trench warriors, ops of warfare, and unmitigated disaster, Knights of the Rogue Dungeon. A pleasant, charming and cheerful game that has been a whole lot of fun to play. So there we have it, something slightly different for you guys. I don't like to be entirely negative, so balancing out this type of video with a game that actually deserves the attention feels like a nice way of doing it. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks to all of you, to our Patreons and members, and as always, for all things Switch all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers guys, see ya!